أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى إترة الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وجل Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Real Talk again. And today our guest speaker is Sarah Gulamhusein. Assalamu alaikum, Sarah.
Walaikum salam.
How are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. How about you?
Alhamdulillah, fine, thank you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, especially some of the things that you're doing and where you're from, where you're based at the moment?
I'm overseas. I'm in Mombasa, tiny island of Mombasa in Kenya. So I'm a psychologist by profession, and I'm currently back here. I started off my education studying medical biochemistry. Then I kind of segued into psychology because I found it really interesting, very interesting branch of sciences. And then after I completed my studies, I sort of came back here and tried to get some more experience and kind of give back to the community that I was brought up in. I think that that's a very important thing to do. Besides this, I work for a Muslim mental health charity called Inspirited Minds. I'm their creative projects officer. I kind of work remotely at the moment. Alhamdulillah, they've let me work remotely. And
Can I stop you every so often, just to sort of I'm going to just keep stopping you if you don't mind. Just
yeah, sure. And I also wanted to
sorry, go on.
I also wanted to say that sometimes I can just ramble off on my own tangents, so just feel free to bring me back.
Thank you. I'm sure it's not rambling. I'm sure there's a lot of learning from what you're going to say. You said you're a psychologist. You've qualified as a psychologist, and you went back home to Mombasa to give back to the community. How easy or difficult was that as a psychologist to give back, and how was that taken? Because obviously psychology is not something that is well known within our communities, I think. So what exactly did you do with the community, and how did you sort of interact with the community and give back to the community?
It wasn't easy, I'll be honest. It's quite challenging because with anything, when you don't know about a topic, it can be quite challenging when I don't want to call myself an expert, but when someone who has a bit more knowledge on the topic comes over and you're like, well, why are you telling me all of this? You're changing my whole belief system, the whole thing that I understand from Islam. So it can be kind of difficult to bring in those new ideas. But on the whole, I think it's been quite positive. I immediately came back and started working in the madrasa, and alhamdulillah, we have such a good madrasa here. They're very open to ideas. So I kind of asked them, is it okay if I can do some projects over here just about mental well-being and just general self-development stuff? So I try to call it self-development because that's ultimately what looking after your mental health is all about. That's what psychology is all about. And through that, I was able to do a program called the Mental Well-Being Through the Life of Bibi Fatima alayhi salam. And
yeah, that sounds amazing.
It was kind of odd. The first time I started talking about it with my sisters, and when we came up with the idea, we were just like, wow, is this going to be received very well? But the idea behind it was that mental well-being or looking after our mental health is not a new idea. It's existed for a really long time. And if it has existed for a really long time, then we should be able to see it from the lives of our Aimma, from the lives of our role models, whose lives we know so well, alhamdulillah. So that was kind of the idea. And in doing the research again about the life of Bibi Fatima that I'd heard about so much when I was young through majalis and madrasa, I actually realized now that I'd studied psychology, hang on, she actually did have some of these aspects in her life, and it was so enlightening. I found some of the aspects, for example, using knowledge to empower people, and then that kind of strong parental attachment or relationship that she had with her children and how she inculcated that love and security in her children from a very young age. All of these aspects are aspects in psychology. So it was really enlightening, mashallah, to try and do that.
I think that for me, the learning would be that we grow up with these, like you're saying, with these holy personalities, and we know their stories inside out, but we don't actually take it in. And I think it's like, as we move on our life journey and we learn different things, then when we go back to those stories and look at them with a different eye, we can actually see the different things that we can take from their stories, from their lives, and actually start using them as role models within our lives. So I think maybe one of the things that we can sort of encourage each other to do is to re-look at the stories of these holy personalities throughout our lives, to see what perspectives we can take from them.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I would never have thought of taking, a psychological perspective, but like you're saying, there's a lot, like the parental attachment, and some of the things that you pointed. There's a lot that we can take from her, which is from psychology, obviously.
Yeah, the PMF I found most prominent was about her social work, and social work and psychology go hand in hand, right? And she just really stood for her social community as a woman. She didn't just stay at home. In fact, one of the books I found actually said this, that she advanced herself in the political sphere as much as she advanced herself in other spheres, the spiritual one, the educational one, and all of that. She really found a way to balance everything.
Yeah.
And that was so profound for me. I knew when I read that I have to share this with someone, So,
again, it's showing how Islam is very holistic, right? I mean, I think we get caught up on the ibadah aspect, thinking that worship is just salah and du'as and things like that, but there's so much more that worshipping Allah is about.
Yeah, exactly. And then we tried to replicate that with the life of Imam Ali, but we're still working on that. We kind of got held up because of coronavirus. So, but alhamdulillah, I mean, we're going to try and explore Imam Ali's life, and then Imam Hussein's, and maybe even all the Imams one day, if we can.
Maybe a suggestion would be to actually look at Imam Ali alayhi salam and Bibi Fatima alayhi salam's life together, because I think there'd be a lot of learning for us married people in how they had such a blissful marriage. And I don't think it's just that because they were such amazing people, that's why they had a blissful marriage. I think, there's a lot of learning we can take from their lives for our marriages.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I would be the perfect person to do that, but inshallah, that's a really great idea. We'll definitely take it on board.
Thank you. So I know I've looked into your 21 Days of Positivity project that you had. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the idea for the 21 Days of Positivity came just after the lockdown started a few months ago. Was it a few months ago? I sometimes lose track of time, but
we all do.
In March-ish, I would say, and Ramadan was just around the corner, and my sister and I, we were talking about it, and she said, wouldn't it be lovely if you just did something just on WhatsApp, or some internationally, that anyone can follow it, just to kind of spread this positivity and ask people to do something small on a day-to-day basis. The idea we had in mind was trying to give beneficial activities that people can do at home. But as a psychologist, I thought, well, let's tweak it a bit. Why don't we try and do something on an individual basis, something about positive self-development, because positivity is so, so important. So that's how we started.
I just stopped you here. Why is it so important?
A lot of people have asked me that, and I think it's a very big concept, but I'll try and summarize it as best I can. We really underestimate the power of being positive. And when I say the word positivity or being positive, I don't mean being optimistic. Being optimistic is always looking for the good in everything, right? But even though optimism is a part of positivity, positivity is more about understanding the reality of the situation or the reality of what's around us, and then acknowledging the negative aspects of it and trying to improve them, and acknowledging the strength or the things that we brought to it that worked for the future. So it's kind of like really working on yourself or developing yourself. So true positivity will then be about picking those aspects that can be beneficial and then those aspects that aren't. For example, if I make a mistake, And I personally can tend to be very self-critical when I make a mistake, even when I stutter a bit in a sentence, like how I've been doing since the beginning. I'm already feeling that, oh, I'm stuttering too much. It's becoming really obvious in my mind now. And that's so the first thing then would be, instead of focusing too much on my mistake or what I've done, I would start applying positivity. So I would ask myself, hang on, why am I stuttering so much? Okay, I'm stuttering because I'm a little nervous. So I'm kind of aware, I identify the problem. And then after the session, I'll probably go away and reflect a little bit, reflect on why this nervousness came out in this way. Ask myself this question, take that time out, really explore myself and my responses. And then, okay, what can I do to then become better in the future? So now I'm focusing on my problem solving skills. Okay, so that's also a part of positivity, because now I've identified it, instead of moping around and saying, "Oh, I stuttered so much," which we can tend to do a lot. It's like, okay, I'm going to try and solve this problem, but then I'm also going to fill myself with a little bit of self-compassion and say, so I stuttered. It's okay. Nothing bad came out of it, And I'm not perfect. I mean, I'm trying my best, alhamdulillah, and all of us have that chance every single day to do that. So that's what I mean by positivity. And that's kind of the idea I took into this 21 days program. But it's all about.
Can I just summarize here? Because I think what you've said has been really powerful, and I think it'd be nice to actually sort of maybe understand it. And maybe if you can correct me if I'm wrong. So first of all, positivity is not, I think, okay, let's look at how we usually handle things. So either we'll sit there and be very, very self-critical and really sort of have a go at each other. And a lot of the times we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't talk to anyone else like we talk to ourselves. We're really harsh on ourselves. And I think that's important to recognize. We need to sort of give ourselves a break sometimes. I think the second thing that you said, which I think what I got from it, is not to bury your head in the sand. So not sort of just to ignore the problem, but actually identify what the problem is, and then work through the problem, identify why the problem's there, and see what you can do, whether you can do something about it. And sometimes you may not be able to do something about it, and recognizing that must be quite powerful as well, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is maybe not go to the other extreme where you're just feeling sorry for yourself. It's like and going into that sort of wallowing in your own self-pity. So it's I suppose this comes into all aspects of our life. So it's not just when we're doing something wrong, but when something's done to us as well. It's looking at the positivity of that sort of, okay, so this was done to me, rather than focusing on, feeling sorry for ourselves. I suppose the positivity would be to actually think about, where's the growth in this, or why did this happen? Where's the learning? What can I take away from this? Am I right?
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, because that's what positivity is. It's a process of growing and then kind of coming into yourself, because it's only that way then that we'll be able to achieve our purpose in life, and seek become kind of the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be.
So I suppose the only way to actually do that, I mean, for me, I'm thinking, especially when the hurt comes from someone else, is to actually think about, okay, that person may have said something, so maybe look at excuses why they may have done what they've done or said what they've said, and also look at the fact that Allah is there in the picture and not take him out of the picture, because although this may not have come directly from God, he's giving me the tools to be able to handle it and grow from it.
Does that work? Yeah, of course. And there is a lot to be said about how religion can help on a psychological level as well. And you've said it really perfectly. And I think I would like to add as well that once we start being positive with ourselves and we show ourselves that self-compassion, the problem-solving skills, and we really acknowledge where our strengths and weaknesses lie, then I think we'll definitely be able to do that with our interactions with other people. And as you've said, if the hurt comes from someone else, we'll be able to see that more objectively, that this person is probably going through a similar struggle or something that is bugging them in their mind. So instead of being really aggressive about it or trying to point the finger of blame, we'd be better off, because now we understand. So we would be in the best position to support that person and say, well, I can see that this has really hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. would you like to talk about it? Is there any way I can support you? Do you need a helping hand? And in that way, if each of us, I think individually as a human race can be more empathetic like that, I mean, it would be a dream to live in such a community, right?
Inshallah,
It's like
that's
a
true.
domino effect.
Sorry, say that again.
I was saying it was kind of like a domino effect then.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's what Islam teaches. And I think it has to start from me myself, right? I can't expect it to come from someone else. And I think that's really important. So, and like, the hadith of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, think of 70 excuses why this person may have done this before you sort of blame them. Because again, like you're saying, we don't know what's going on in their life. So they may be going through their own journey, or, have had some bad news, or, something like that. So again, 70 excuses is really, really important. And I don't think we even think of one or two. We just like jump down people's throats because, we felt bad. And then it's quite powerful to actually take a step back and think, you know what? They may be going through something. Yeah. And even if they're not going through something and they are just being really mean, which is not normally the way people react, but, people behave. But if they are, by allowing them to get into my head, I suppose I'm actually allowing them to hurt me again and again and again.
Definitely. And I really think that's important, because that kind of guides then our actions. And when we start being more objective with ourselves and with other people, then those people who are perhaps being mean for the sake of it, or trying to get revenge maybe for something, or just out to hurt you for some reason or the other, I think we can really solve those kind of barriers or those rifts between people and come together, because there's always a reason why people act the way they do. It doesn't just come from nowhere, So yeah.
Amazing. Sorry, I keep interrupting. That's amazing. Yeah. So going back to the 21 day of positivity. So what were the sort of, can you give some examples of what were some of the challenges, and whether it's something that is available to people, or are you doing something else like that? Or because I'm sure a lot of people miss out on it.
Yeah, it was initially supposed to just be like on WhatsApp, where I share an exercise or activity to do every day. But then it quickly became like this really big thing. A lot of people were interested in it. So I created an Instagram page, which is actually the page of my platform at the moment. It's called Sazesh. And what it does is...
Can I get you to spell that so that people know if they want to
right. So
follow you on Instagram?
Right. So on Instagram, it's at TSAZESH. TSAZESH. Sazesh, where the T is silent. The T actually stands for my mom. So she was kind of the one who encouraged me to do all of these different projects. And we've got all the exercises there on Instagram, and also on WhatsApp if you want. I think I'm not sure it will be easier to contact me on WhatsApp, but yeah, definitely check out the Instagram page. There's one activity for each day, and most of it is just about identifying what are our barriers in our lives, or what are our weaknesses, and then also identifying our strengths, because we have to create that balance, right? And then working on those to fulfill that kind of positive self-development that we can really do in our lives.
I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people choose not to work on themselves, and again, it's a choice. And I think I don't think anyone's there that they don't need to work on themselves. I think every one of us needs to work on ourselves. So I think it's recognizing that I do need to work on myself to better myself, because if I was there, I wouldn't be living. God would have taken me from this world, because there's no point me continuing on this world if I've got there already.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important.
I can understand that, because it's really hard. It's hard admitting the places that you've gone wrong, or the mistakes you may have made. It's hard admitting that there are things happening in your life that are not the best of things, or where you're struggling in life. But it's important to know that the choice of what to do and how to deal with it is in our hands. And I think that's what positivity is all about. That's why it's so empowering, that we are in control of our thoughts, we are in control of our actions and our reactions, and we can really change our lives if we want to.
That's so true. And I think we spend a lot of time blaming others for our choices. I can't do this because I have children, or because I have to work all the time, or you know what, my spouse wouldn't let me understand me, or whatever it is. It's always someone else's fault. And again, it's a choice that I'm making. So I think it is very, very empowering when I even if I decide not to do it, it's sort of actually saying to myself, I choose not to do this. It's very empowering, because again, I'm taking the choice and making that choice. I think that's really, really empowering. I think when you sort of blame others, you actually disempower yourself.
Of course, it's like a spectrum. At least that's how I see it. On one side of the spectrum is you always want to blame other people because taking responsibility is just very hard to do. And on the other side of the spectrum is, well, it's my circumstances. So it's kind of like that defeatist kind of approach to it, that, well, there's nothing I can do. You know, this is the way it is. These are circumstances. We're just going to live with it. And then when you kind of move away from those extremities and come to a moderate perspective, it's like, okay, circumstances the way they are, there is at least something small that I can do, if not for everyone else's benefit, then for my own benefit. And then inshallah, if the opportunity arises, I can help somebody else or be a support part of someone else's support system.
Yeah,
So in that way, kind of taking into consideration all these things. Sure.
For sure. And I think, like you said, it is difficult. I mean, I've looked at your some of the stuff that you posted up there, and it is very intense. And like you're saying, when you come out of your comfort zone and actually really examine yourself as the sort of who you truly are, it does make you feel very uneasy, because it's like you realize what your weaknesses are, and it's nice because you like you're saying, it's a balance. It's recognizing not only your weaknesses but your strengths as well. And I think that's quite empowering, because with my strengths, then I realize that I can work on my weaknesses, and okay, I may never get over them totally, like you're saying, with the stuttering, by the way, which I haven't noticed at all, just to let you know. It's just recognizing that, you know what, I may still continue doing this, but I need to be okay with it, because I've tried what I can and got to where I am, and now I'm okay with the way I am, and actually sort of being, letting myself off the hook to a certain extent.
And on that note, it does get easier with time. You may start some of these exercises and find them really difficult, but with time, that's the power of the mind, is that it will really get used to some of these things.
Brilliant. You mentioned that the T stood for your mum, and because she's helped you on this journey and encouraged you and everything. How did she do that?
So I actually mentioned that in passing. The T stands for my mom, and then the Z, which is the other capital letter of Sudesh, stands for my dad. And both of my parents, I mean, alhamdulillah, I don't think I'll ever be able to repay them. They inspired me and motivated me from such a young age. I was always the kind of girl who wanted to do these different excursions or activities. Anytime we would travel or go visit relatives, I was in charge of planning the games and kind of making sure that all the entertainment was looked after. So they kind of taught me then through that to think for myself and approach any problem that I had as well with kind of practical solutions, or kind of think about it and try to come to my own solution for it that I was comfortable with and that they were comfortable with as well. And in that way, I learned how to reflect a lot. I didn't know it was called reflection at the time until I studied, but that's what I was doing. That's what they were encouraging me to do. And they also encouraged me to balance, as I've said, to balance the positive of every situation with the negative, because there's always two sides to every story. There's always two sides of the coin. So that kind of was the role that they played in my life.
So I suppose as parents, the two things that we can take away, which you found very valuable as a child, is to allow your child space to reflect. So maybe asking them to arrange games, or think about certain things to allow them to reflect, without sort of sitting them down and say, okay, now reflect, because it's like you would have no idea how to go about doing that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I know.
Sorry.
I know when my kids were young. Sorry. One of the things that we used to play was, what should I do now? So it's like we'd say to them, okay, we've forgotten the keys and we've reached home. What should I do now? Mm-hmm. And then they'd say, well, look to see if there's any windows open. Okay, there's no windows open. What should I do now? So it's like constantly getting them to think of the next step and the next step and the next step. And I suppose that's what you're looking at, right? Just an example.
Yeah, of course. It's funny you should mention that, because we also experienced something similar, and that was yeah, that was one of the ways. But also another way that my mom really got me to reflect was every night before going to bed, before reciting our surahs, we would just talk about our day. She would tell me about her day, and then she would add those reflective bits, like I thought this or I felt this, rather than saying this is what happened, and then encourage me to do that as well. And as a young girl, I remember always saying, well, this is what happened. And she'd be like, but what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? And those questions, they may be so underestimated, I think, because it's just those simple questions that can get a person to start reflecting. So
That's really powerful. And I suppose from that, then maybe think about, if you feel good about it, or if you think you've done well, then to thank Allah. And if you feel bad about it, or you think you've done badly, then actually ask for forgiveness from Allah. So taking it one step further and connecting God to it. And I think the other thing that you said was that they always taught you how to see the positive in every situation. And I think that's really beautiful, because again, we have within the Holy Quran, with hardship is ease. So Allah's actually telling us with every hardship, there is always ease in that hardship as well. It's not that it comes after the hardship, it's already there within the hardship. And it's looking for that ease within the hardship.
Yeah, which is easier said than done, because I lost my mom 2 years ago, and
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I still don't know how to reply to that. Inshallah, I will find an apt way of communicating myself. But that grief that I experienced, I mean, I had already completed my master's at the time. And as a therapist, you learn the concept of grief and exactly how to go about the stages, how to provide the counseling or grief therapy. But when I'm going through it on my own, I mean, I don't think even the education was enough to prepare me. I was aware of the stages, I was aware of what I was going through, what kind of thoughts I was having, what kind of reflective practices, like how negative I was becoming myself. And it was just seeing it through a different light. I mean, I really came to appreciate just how unique every person's experience is, because not only was I dealing with my own grief, but then I had my sisters, my entire family, and they were all dealing with grief in a different way. So as a psychologist, that was so interesting to me, and I came to appreciate that everyone is truly unique in their own experiences. And that diversity can give us so much power and strength, I feel.
Wow. And that's amazing, because from that experience, it's obvious, next time you counsel someone who's going through grief, it'll be from a totally different perspective, because you've actually experienced it yourself and gone through it. So you're more aware of what they're going through when you've actually been through it yourself.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I was actually thinking about while you were talking was, as Muslims, we know all of the theory, but actually putting it into practice is a little bit more difficult. And I think that's what you were saying, like you knew the theory of grief, but actually sort of putting everything into practice, all the tools that you would normally tell other people to do, to actually think about it and see the value in it and try to bring it into your own life, it was quite difficult. And I think maybe that's something we all need to reflect on, is like, am I actually living the stuff that I know? Am I actually using the knowledge that I know? Am I using the tools that I've been given by God? I think that would be quite powerful reflection.
Yeah, of course. Actually, you're reminding me of a time when what I would do is recite. There's so many du'as to recite to help you with grief, right? One of the du'as I recited, I actually looked up the meaning, and it didn't really, well, I don't want to say help, but it didn't really strike a note with me in the beginning. And I feel because I was going through those really strong emotions and I was struggling in that way, I was kind of in that phase where I was angry, annoyed, frustrated, which is one of the phases of grief. But somehow something kept me just coming back to that dua and just reciting it over and over and over again, until I reached that point where now the meaning of that dua it just touches me in such a profound way. And through that, I found a little bit of healing. I found a little bit of sukoon. And I guess that's really important, because there are certain practices in theory that we have, but we don't truly appreciate them. Or I feel, in my case at least, I didn't give it enough patience. I didn't give it enough energy or enough focus for long enough to reach the point where it actually started helping me. And with this one dua, I found that when I went the long way, it actually did start helping me.
And I think that, yeah, so I suppose where it says that God wants continuity rather than lots and lots of things, it's important. But I think with that, continuity should be done with, I suppose, presence of heart and presence of mind. Because again, if you were just reciting the du'as without constantly looking at the translation, although you felt the translation at the beginning didn't have any value, you were constantly looking at it to try to get something from it. So it's not just reciting it like a ritualistic thing where we're just doing it every single day because we've got used to doing it, but actually being present in the moment and trying to see what God wants us to learn from it.
I'm pretty sure that's what I was doing. I think that's the kind of route that I was trying to come to, is that this dua is for people who are going through grief. So why is it not helping me? What am I doing wrong? Because that implicit trust that this is going to help me, but why is it not helping me? It kind of can be a little bit frustrating. But I guess with patience and a little bit of dedication and just maybe a shift in perception, which is what I faced, then that kind of practice that maybe was not so helpful before becomes a bit more meaningful and helpful in the future. And I think that's what helped me in my process of dealing
Can
with
I
the grief.
pick up on something that you said here, which I think is really powerful, and maybe if you can just explain it a little bit more, is this shift in perception. What did you mean by that, and how can we bring that about in ourselves?
Right. So I said that in the beginning I was kind of angry, frustrated. There's always that thought at the back of your mind, or that doubt at the back of your mind. Why, Allah, did you take my parent away when I was so young? Why did you take away someone I loved? It doesn't have to be a parent, it can be anyone, when at this stage of my life. And that's always there. But then when you start thinking about it objectively or from a different perspective, you really start realizing the mercy of Allah. And this is just something that I experienced, before I was so over reliant on my mom for everything. I mean, she was my best friend. I would do everything with her. Anytime I had any kind of advice that I needed, or I made a mistake, the first person I'd go to is, Mom, I've done this. What do I do? And all of a sudden, just magically, she would have the solution to every problem. And I think a lot of us do face that with our parents. And then after she passed away, it was kind of like a hole, is the best way I can explain it. It wasn't really a hole, but I saw it as a hole left in my life or in my heart without her. But when I had that shift in perception, I realized, well, the hole wasn't really her absence. The whole was my over-reliance on her. I gave her that room, and now I have this empty room. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to just leave it there and mope about it and, blame anyone or be defeatist or whatever end of the spectrum I go to? Or am I going to now start filling it with something else? And that's exactly what I did, because now I've realized 2 years on, I've become closer to my dad. I've become closer to my other siblings, and I've also become really close to Allah through that. And I've really but come round to appreciating the full picture, that my mom was from Allah and she's gone back to Him now. And a few years down the line, that could be me. I mean, it could be me tomorrow. I don't know.
Wow, that is amazing. That is just wow.
But I think a long time is what I'm trying to say. It took 2 years to get to that perception change, to get to that realization. So I really do appreciate how hard it is.
Do you think it would have been easier or quicker to get to if you had been taught this is what you're trying to move towards? Or because obviously you came to that realization on your own, trying to think it through and realizing that there's a hole and what do I do with that? Or do you think it would have helped to actually maybe have that idea in your head from the beginning, or before this tragedy happened? Well, what you see as a tragedy, I mean, before your mum moved on her spiritual path to the next part of her journey, before you felt the grief, if you had already sort of been I don't know, been given some sort of tools on how to think and what to think about, and then when you were put in that situation, would it have been easier or quicker to get to that change of perception?
Yeah, I definitely do think so. There was a kind of point when I was doing my master's degree where I learned about how to teach others to cope with grief. And when I learned that, I realized, well, hang on, Islam is a perfect religion. It considers every part of life. As we've said, it's a very holistic religion. Why haven't I come across this in Islam, or any of the Islamic books that you read on grief? I mean, before that, I had lost my grandmother as well, so I was aware of the book. You can have those books, to read what to do, how to do them, the du'as and everything. But then all of them I found lacked this particular aspect of grief and how to deal with it, and how then to help you with this perception shift, or this, in psychology, it's called reframing. Um, and that's when I really realized that even though Islam has all of these things, same with mental well-being through the life of our ai I think we can all do a little bit more effort to research it and bring it to the fore for everyone, because that's one of the ways that really helped me. And in my counseling with other clients, I've tried to use these techniques, and it's really worked as well, alhamdulillah. So I definitely think that there is a lot to be said for trying to bring these things to light, or just allowing ourselves maybe to share our experiences if we can. In the UK, I know that bereavement support groups are very, very popular. So there's so many support groups where you go share your experiences, what helped you. That's so powerful. And I've been part of some of the support groups. They really do help you. They help you see things from a different perspective, but then also learn more about other people, about what they've gone through, and appreciate that from a different lens. So yeah, definitely recommend.
No, for sure. And I think what was powerful in what you said is in changing perception is maybe always sort of constantly remind ourselves that God is the only entity that will never leave us,
Yes.
ever. So it's like, whether our loved one leaves us through no fault of theirs, through no choice of theirs, through death or, something like that, or they leave us because we've had, some sort of argument or whatever, or we see the imperfection, because obviously no one is perfect, so we see the imperfection in our loved one, and then the whole relationship changes because of that. Whereas with God, because of God is perfection itself, and God is always there, it's like, I suppose the attachment that we should have with God is something that we should all be working on, so that we don't feel this hole when someone else in our relationships moves even a little bit away or changes in some way or whatever.
Yes, definitely. I agree with that. Sorry, I was just hearing something from the line. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say that you've actually reminded me about this when you said that God doesn't abandon us. And I kind of did feel a little abandoned, because I did over rely on my mom, and I did not really rely on anyone else, or even so much so on Allah Himself. And it was actually after that, and I'm not sure if this is related in any way, but after my mom passed away, it all of a sudden became everybody's kind of mission to tell me that, well, now you have to get married, because
Wow.
now you're all alone. So you have to sort it out, and once you get married, you're going to be fine, And because I was feeling the loneliness at the time, perhaps I sort of took it to mean that, well, maybe by getting married, I would not be so alone anymore, and I'd be able to deal with my grief a bit better. So I got those constant doubts, because there was that kind of pressure there, and everyone was telling me to do that. And I know it's so odd, but I guess because of the frame of mind I was in, I thought that that would be a solution. But because I really used the time to reflect, and I did not want to make any hasty decisions, I decided, you know what? I'm not in the right frame of mind right now. I mean, I tried, I really did. But it just wasn't there. And I thought that I really need to consider what my intention is. Am I just going to get married to quell this loneliness or to get rid of this hole in my heart all of a sudden? Or am I going to wait and do it at the right time when I know I'll be doing it for the right intention, which is to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to complete this journey that we're all eventually on, right? Which is to seek nearness to Him. So it was a tough decision to make, I'll say, but alhamdulillah, I got the support from my family. And I really think that afterwards, when I was sharing this experience with some of my friends, most of them just came up and said, well, you know what? We kind of face something similar because of a struggle or something in their life. They were kind of pushed towards getting married. And I know that marriage is half of Islam, is the sunnah of the Prophet. And alhamdulillah, is such a beautiful way of reaching that elevated level, close to Allah. But I think we need to take a step back and really think before doing it. Why are we doing it? What is it about this marriage that we are taking this decision for? So
I think that's amazing reflective questions that you've actually left people with. I think that's amazing, because I do feel we don't think about marriage. We don't reflect on the reason behind marriage. It's literally the next tick box. It's like, okay, now that you've graduated, you need to get married. Or, you know what, now you don't have parents taking care of you, you need to get married. Or, and again, it's like, if God chooses for you not to be married for whatever reason, or the next stage after marriage is now you have to have kids. And again, if God chooses not to give you children for whatever reason, we shouldn't feel any less, because that's not the end goal. Like you said, the end goal is Allah. It's moving towards Allah. So whether it's through marriage, whether it's through being a wife or a mother, or being just single, it doesn't matter what life situation I'm in, as long as my end goal is constantly Allah and I'm moving towards Allah. I think we go into marriage for, I don't think we even think about what we go into marriage for. We just do it because it's the next thing that we should do.
I have not been through that, so I don't know. But
I think the sad thing is, I was actually talking to someone about this, and we were talking about how before you get married, you have so many different friends, and like you'll have a friend who sort of serves as your fun friend, and a friend who sort of gives you advice, and a friend who is the serious one, and a friend who does this. And then when you get married, it's like your spouse becomes your everything, and that person is supposed to fulfill all these needs which different people were fulfilling, and it's just not possible for them to do that. So I think we do put a lot of pressure on our spouses, and it's like, again, for them to fill that hole that should be filled by Allah, it's not possible. So I think it's recognizing that marriage is not supposed to be the happy ever after that we're taught in the Disney movies, but it's actually for growth towards Allah. And then it's through the challenges and the happy and the sad moments that inshallah will bring us closer to Allah.
And I think listening to what you said, I remembered that a lot of people think, and I've heard this personally from many sources, that marriage will solve a problem that you're having in life, not just from my own personal experience of grief, but I've heard other things, other stories as well. And I firmly don't believe in that. I don't know about your opinion, but I think that if you have a problem to begin with, or you're struggling with something to begin with, then you can't just think or imagine that it's going to be taken away by making a big life decision, unless your big life decision is to solve it. So by getting married, or even by, say, moving away from a place, or making another big life decision, an investment, or whatever, it's not going to solve that problem. It's not going to take it away, and it'll eventually come back in some way or the other. And I've learned that in life with so many experiences. So I really think that people can take that away. That
no, for sure. I think that's really, really important to recognize that we need to be constantly working on ourselves and working on our relationship with God. And we may have different life situations, and it's not to say that everything has to be hunky-dory before we get married, but we shouldn't expect the marriage to solve our life situations that we're in. It's the marriage is there in order to bring us closer to God, but I have to be ready for that next stage in my journey, rather than just jumping into it and thinking, okay, you know what, I won't have to think about this one if I go into this one. But it doesn't work like that, like you said. And it's the same, I suppose, when you're married. A lot of married couple will have children when they're having issues in their marriage, and again, it doesn't really solve the issues if you haven't worked through the issues. So yeah, no, alhamdulillah.
And I think every single kind of tick box, as you said, it really should be met with a little bit of skepticism or apprehension, because when you are making a big life decision, any big life decision, there has to be that kind of reflection and reevaluation. And as we've already said, the first step should be thinking about your niyat, but then also thinking about, what is this in the grand scheme of things? How does this work with the bigger picture? Am I being objective with this particular decision or not? Does it even make sense? Because sometimes in our emotions we can take a very rash decision. Like when I was going through grief, my rash decision was, well, I kind of tried to fight it, but my rash decision was, well, you know what? If Allah doesn't care about me, I don't care about him. And astaghfirullah, I actually reached that point where I said that. But through that, when I actually said it, I realized, well, does that really embody everything that I've been through? Does that really embody what Islam is about? There has to be some positivity that I'm failing to see from this, And it was around the same time where I came to that realization about my reliance on my mom, and how then I realized that I'm actually becoming closer to Allah. So why then am I trying to stop myself from adapting to that change? Why then am I trying to resist that change? Because change is a very difficult thing. And going through that process, the first thing my mind told me is, no, don't change. Everything will eventually go back to the way it was. But it's not that simple. I don't think that's true most of the time, is that things don't just go back to the way they were. You have to adapt and change and grow.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's the whole concept of sabr, right? We take it as something very passive, where you just wait it out and things will just get back to normality, sort of thing. First of all, there's no such thing as normality. And secondly, sabr is supposed to be very active. It's supposed to be, that sort of perseverance in doing what Allah would want us to do, and moving on our spiritual path towards Him, and growing from it. And like you said, it's very difficult because it's coming out of our comfort zone, and our mind will resist, and it will tell you and okay things and justify things, and you'll sort of really truly believe that you're making these decisions of not moving for really good reasons. But if you actually sit there and reflect on the reasons you're making these decisions, like you're saying, they actually don't make sense. So it's like, although you said this, and then you thought to yourself, hang on a minute, how is this helping me grow closer to Him? If I want to replace that hole with Allah, then how am I doing that? By thinking this.
Yeah.
So yeah, reflecting, right? That's really important.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you brought up sabr, because I think that's what I was lacking. I had reached a point where I was so frustrated at the grief that I was experiencing, at my constant need of not wanting to do anything, of just staying at home and crying. And when I realized that, well, actually, I reached the realization that I was actually not being patient with myself. I was not allowing myself to channel this grief in a positive way. I just wanted it to go away, And I think in life we face a lot of those instances where there comes a negative emotion or a very strong emotion that we don't particularly like, and then we just want it to go away. But it's not just going to go away unless we deal with it, unless we allow that grief to channel out of ourselves. And I'm not just trying to say that, okay, spend the whole day crying, or lock yourself up from social experience or interaction. I think, as you said before, try to create that balance. So if one day you wake up and you're not really feeling up to it, then just be compassionate with yourself and say, okay, I'm not feeling up to it today. Can we maybe reschedule for another day? And then that other day, make sure that you do put a little bit of effort and go out and just let yourself have that social interaction. Allow yourself to let that grief move on while you are moving on.
Yeah.
And I think that's what to come to.
Yeah, I think it's feeling the pain, but also working out how to work through the pain as well, and seeing the positivity. And it's different for different people. For some it's quicker, for some it takes a little bit longer. And again, being compassionate to yourself, and realizing that, what, I need a little bit more time, and that's okay. But not just burying your head in the sand and sort of making it okay that it can then, I'm not doing anything about this. So not just waiting for it to go away by itself. It's never going to do that. We have to actively do something.
And even the other end of the spectrum, which is don't try and force yourself to get over it really quickly. Because if you're the kind of person who needs that time, then give yourself the time. It's okay. You know, Allah has put it there as your jihad, as your struggle. So don't like try and say, well, I know you've given me this test, but I'm just going to try and push it away from my life. No, it's there for a reason. So I think if we see it in that perspective, again, that reframing, so it kind of moves the way you think about it, and then your response to it automatically changes.
Yeah. No, also, I think one of the things that you said was the fact that your father and your siblings were there to help, and recognizing that there are people that Allah sends in our lives to help us through this pain that we're feeling, and actually accepting that help is really important. And I think we have to be humble enough to accept that help. I think sometimes our ego makes us think we can do it all on our own, and if we could do it all on our own, God wouldn't send us people in our lives to help us.
Yeah. And that is actually, I have faced that in the past, not just with myself, but with other people too. As a psychologist, when I notice something and I try to maybe ask someone, you know, I think you're going through a tough time. Maybe let's just have a talk, you know, sometime. But then, I mean, it's really been surprising, but people just don't want to talk about the problems they're going through. Because I understand it's hard to do that. But then I kind of wonder, is it that ego that comes in? Because when I was going through grief, it was that ego that was coming in. It was that arrogance that, do I really need this? You know, it's gonna go away on its own. I'll just let it go away. And there are always those thoughts that kind of come into our mind. And in psychology, we call them intrusive thoughts. They're not particularly honest and they're not particularly helpful at all. And it's about trying to identify when these thoughts come into our mind, and then using all the tools that we have to try and reflect and to try and come back to what the reality is that, is this thought really helpful for me right now? You know, is this ego really helpful for me right now? Or do I really need to take that control into my own hands and say, well, I can make this decision and I can actually help myself?
For sure. I think that there's a lot of things that stop us from asking for help, especially when it comes to mental health. I think one is the fact that the culture doesn't allow us to, because it's, you know, we shouldn't talk about our problems outside, and it's, you know, you don't air your dirty laundry sort of thing. But going to a professional person is different than, you know, just talking to anyone and everyone. I think secondly, we've been brought up to believe that if I should only rely on Allah, and I shouldn't, you know, tell other people my problems, because then, and I'm not saying go and tell everyone your problem. Again, it's going to a professional when you feel that you need to. It's important to recognize that. Just like God wouldn't want you to try to sort out a broken arm on your own. You'd go to the hospital and go to the doctor. The same sort of thing. If there's something, you know, not, you know, working correctly, or, you know, something that needs help, then you need to go to a professional when it comes to mental health as well. And the third thing is obviously the ego. I think the ego plays a huge part. And again, to reflect and sort of realize that, oh my God, it is my ego, is a huge statement to make about yourself. And it's really difficult to
I mean, I've come to a point where I've realized it is what it is. I was being a bit egotistical. I was saying that I don't need the help, but I do need the help. And when I was going through that grief, I did seek help in the form of counseling, and I did get better because, as you said, these people are professionals. They're trained to kind of be, not pick your mind, but they're trained to understand what you're going through and then give you a bit more perspective on it, or try and bring something out or shine a light on things that you may not have been seeing in your strong emotional state. And that's exactly what it is all about. I particularly love the way you said that for a broken arm. I mean, of course you'd go to a doctor. So if you're feeling a bit hurt and a bit broken, or you're struggling in your mind, then you should do the same thing. And I understand that people are not very comfortable doing that. So if you're not comfortable doing that, then there are other ways of doing, there are other ways of coping. So try and look into one of those and see if they can help you as well.
I think also one of the other things that I find is, you know, when you go to a professional, you know, when it's to do with psychology or counseling or something like that, I feel like you go with your own way of dealing with it. And obviously you have to come with your own, you know, you have the counselor or the psychologist helps you to come up with your own solutions. But I feel like we need to actually listen to what they say rather than have a set way of looking at it. It's like the way we'd listen to a doctor. I feel like, again, to change that perception in our mind, we need to realize that this is a professional person who's studied and is looking at it from a different perspective, and it's trying to get us to see things in a different perspective. And for me to see it in a different perspective, I need to put my ego aside and listen to what they're telling me and take on board what they're telling me. And I feel like we don't do that when it's to do with psychology, but we do that when it's to do with physical medicine, if that makes sense.
I completely agree. I'm not sure though if people don't do that with physical medicine, because I have come across a time when people will just readily accept what the doctor says, or be ready not to accept what the doctor says because they have their own idea about it in their mind. And I completely understand why people would not want to do that, because you have a person here trying to tell you about your life, trying to tell you about what you did right and what you did wrong, and it's easy to see it that way and to kind of bring up that wall of being defensive then, because you're like, well, what gives you the right? But then again, it's all about how we see it. If we see it as, oh, this person's trying to pick at our lives, I don't think it's going to be much helpful for anyone. And that's why you have to be ready to go see a counselor. No one can really force you to do that, because the moment you shift that and say, well, I've come to this person to get help, I've come to this person because I've tried myself, and it's not working. So there must be something there that I'm obviously not adept at doing. So I need someone to help me with it.
Yeah, I think it's that recognizing that I need help and acknowledging that you need help, and sort of moving your ego aside and then accepting the help from the person that God has sent you.
It also means accepting that you're in a vulnerable position. And that's why it's really hard. No human likes feeling vulnerable. I didn't like feeling vulnerable. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah,
but it's out of that vulnerability that the most beautiful things can come out. I really believe that.
Yeah, no, the greatest growth happens when you're vulnerable, because then you actually realize the strengths that you have within yourself, which you didn't realize you had before. So yeah, for sure. I know there's a lot more I'd love to talk to you about, but we're coming to the end of the show. So maybe if I can ask you to just think of everything that you've been through, working, sort of trying to bring mental health awareness within the community, all the psychology and everything that you've learned, and the grief that you felt, and everything else that's happened in your life. If I can ask you to maybe just share 3 pieces of advice that you'd want people to take away, which might help them on their journey, whatever their life situation is.
Yeah, of course. The first one, and probably the most easiest one to do, even though many people will argue and say it's not easy, is to have a bit of self-compassion. And I don't mean the kind of self-compassion where you start being selfish with yourself or trying to say, well, you know what, I'm going to ignore you because I'm having self-compassion. No, that's not what I mean. I mean to allow yourself to be filled with empathy and understanding about where you're coming from and where you're going, and then striving to be better and fully knowing what your weaknesses are and moving closer to Allah. That's part of your compassion. If you make a mistake, if you get things wrong, which you will, all of us do, that's part of living. Don't let it stop you from doing what you're doing. Don't let it stop you from striving harder and harder and harder until you reach that point in your life where you can confidently say that I have reached the best version of myself now. And it may take years, it may take a really long time, but that self-compassion is very, very important, I think.
It may take a lifetime, right?
Yeah, I think it may take a lifetime.
Maybe if I can ask you to sort of maybe give one practical way we can actually show self-compassion to ourselves, just to help those who maybe don't know how to think of self-compassion.
Yeah. Sure. So there's 2 really easy ways of doing it, and I'll share both of them because they're really quick ways that you can do it. The first one is about doing a positive affirmations exercise. And I was just talking about this the other day, actually. A positive affirmation is when you have a statement about yourself that is positive and that has kind of your strengths in it, even strengths that you may not believe in. And you say that to yourself for once a day. So maybe in the morning when you wake up, look into the mirror when you're brushing your teeth and say that to yourself. You can say it out loud or say it in your mind, or at night when you come back. For example, I would say, I am getting better at being patient, and I love myself for it, because I have a very big struggle with being patient with myself and with other people as well. So that can be my positive affirmation. It can be anything that you want, and you can do that at any time of the day. The second one is being grateful. So list maybe 2 to 3 things every day that you are grateful for, because those things that you list are so important. They make you realize that even if you're in the harshest of struggles, Allah is still providing you with things to be grateful for. So those are two.
Thank you. What I found very powerful was that it's not that you got to being patient, it's I'm getting better at being patient. So even if you haven't reached the end goal, the fact that you're acknowledging that you're getting better at it is a self-affirmation as well, which I thought was really powerful. And the gratefulness, yes, of course, I think that is amazing. And yeah, it really helps when you're going through the down days. What would be your second advice?
My second advice would be self-responsibility. And when I'm talking about self-responsibility, I'm just going to cast your mind back to the beginning of this conversation where we started talking about why positivity is so important. Because there are two ends of the spectrum. There is a point where you can blame other people or blame the circumstances, but never, ever, ever try and be responsible for what you have done. And I know it's hard to say I'm sorry. I also find it really hard to say I'm sorry. And it's because of that ego that we were talking about. But when we be more self-responsible in our life and we account for everything that we do, I think we can lead more empowered lives, because ultimately it's about knowing that you have control over your circumstances. You have control over your choices. We have free will. That's the beautiful gift that has been given to us by Allah. And I think if we use it to its full potential, we can definitely achieve our purpose of seeking nearness to Allah. So a little bit of self-responsibility, and it can actually go a long way. And just quickly, my third advice is...
Sorry, before you go into your third advice, can I just, maybe one of the things that would help you to take self-responsibility is if you're finding that in every relationship is breaking down, or, you're going through the same issues, or, you're finding that people are treating you the same way or something, then maybe look at your own self, and maybe there's something that I need to change in myself. If every single relationship is working out the same way, there must be something that I'm not doing quite right, and taking self-responsibility on that would help maybe.
Yeah, and I know it can be very uncomfortable to try and reach that point where you say, well, maybe something's wrong with me, and then you can start thinking about all those negative things and really struggle with your self-esteem. But admitting that there's something wrong with you doesn't have to mean that you are wrong. It just means that there is a weakness that I have, and I just need to work on it.
And I think that's what's powerful. It's recognizing the weakness in order to work on it, not recognizing the weakness to beat myself up about it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a world of difference between those two scenarios. And then my third one quickly is using healthy coping mechanisms, because we are definitely going to struggle in our life. We have these tests, and this jihad is constant. It's a promise from Allah. It's a certainty. So when we're going through any struggles, just try and have these healthy coping mechanisms. For example, instead of spiraling downwards or having this defeatist personality and blaming other people, do something creative, do something new, work on a skill you've always wanted to, a hobby. These small things, even though they feel really small, they actually have such huge benefit that has been proven by research time and time again. Write if you want to. When I was going through my grief, I started writing, and it took me 2 years to complete a book for my mom. I don't know if I have it. I don't know if we have time to have it, but I actually wrote a book for my mom, Fragrance of Death. I don't know if you can see it. So that's in loving memory of my mom. And it's got quite a few pages in there. And through that writing, I actually found that I was able to cope better. And all these intrusive thoughts that I was having, or these negative thoughts, they just somehow disappeared. They went away. And that really, really, really is positive and powerful and helpful.
That's amazing. So you actually took something out from the grief and something very powerful, which may help others as well, which is amazing. and sorry, the book was called Fragrance of Death?
Yeah, right
And
here. Fragrance of
available.
Death, basically. So it is available right now in Mombasa because that's where I am. But we're trying to get a copy online, inshallah. If like enough people want it, then I'm not gonna say no. But actually it's for sale, and the money that we're getting from the book, we're trying to pump it into our mom's trust fund. When my mom was alive, she really thought that educating the less fortunate people was her duty on, like, when she was alive, because education is what can break the cycle of poverty, and that's what she firmly believed in. So after her death, we kind of continued that. So every little bit that the book is going to make, all of it is going to go towards educating less fortunate people.
And that's amazing. I think, sorry, I'm just trying to sort of summarize the three. So the first one was self-compassion. The second one was self-responsibility. And the third one was having healthy coping mechanism. And I think for those who maybe are not authors, I mean, just even writing it down, and sometimes it's, you feel like, okay, what's the point? But maybe you can just write a letter to the 12th Imam. And then just bury it, and then he'll get it, and then that might make you feel better because then you're handing it over to someone. The thing that works for me is actually talking to Allah out loud, because when I say it out loud, it's like I'm taking out the negativity from within myself, one, and two, it's like I hear it myself, so it just feels like I recognize how difficult it is for me, or how big an issue it is, or how little an issue is it, because sometimes you make the issue such a big thing in your mind, but when you actually say it out loud, you think, okay, that wasn't really that big a deal. I don't know why I'm getting so stressed about this. So there's lots of different coping mechanisms, and I think everyone has to find what works for them, and it's again, we're such individuals that we'd all have different things that work for us.
I actually just gave this bit of advice to somebody the other day, is that if you're finding that there's so many thoughts buzzing in your mind, just say it out loud and be as if you're talking to Allah, and He really does reply. I mean, I've asked Him time and time again so many different questions, and I've got my answers. So it's something really powerful about trusting that I'm saying this to you, Allah, and I know you're going to answer me back, and then you get the answer. And
the funny thing is, the answer you usually get is not the answer that you're expecting, and that's why it doesn't. You're like, seriously, is that what you want me to do?
And then you think, well, thank you so much for that answer. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I will try my best, Allah. And you really create that relationship. It doesn't have to be a really strict relationship. It can be any kind of relationship that you create with Allah, as long as you're doing it.
Exactly. Sorry, before we finish, I know we've gone over our time, but there's a few questions here which I think it's worth looking into. So we've got a comment here that for the record, someone's writing that they would love to purchase your book digitally. So maybe it's something that's the next step you need to take. And inshallah. But we've got here that have you got any tips on how to counsel a loved one still dealing with trauma and guilt for over 5 years? For example, lost their loved one to a car accident and blaming themselves. I know it's a huge thing, but if you could just summarize maybe a few things that they could help that loved one.
So because it's about it's a traumatic event that took the loved one away, there's bound to be a lot of shock and a lot of blaming or guilt related to it. So I would say try and focus on those emotions, and first and foremost, let them pass out of you. Don't hold on to that grief, because sometimes with time we can tend to hold on to that, because giving ourselves closure would mean completely moving away from that. And because we're so used to that emotion, we don't want to completely move away from that. So allow those emotions to flow through you into the universe. Even if you have to cry it out or seek counseling for that, that's okay. The second thing I would say is, because it's traumatic based, you really do need closure. So write a letter, and this is what I use in my practice as well. Write a letter to the deceased person as if the deceased person is actually going to get that letter. And in that, include everything that you ever want to say to that person about everything you're feeling. Okay, and at the end of that process, reflect on what you've written, or maybe give yourself some time, because doing that kind of thing can be very emotionally releasing. So write it, put it aside, and then come back to it a few days later and reflect on it. What exactly have you said? Why have you said it? Because when you start writing, I mean, you can release so many different things that you never know were inside. And it's the same thing when you start speaking about it to a counselor or something. There's so many things that can come out. So try doing that. And inshallah, through those things, you can kind of get that closure.
No, thank you for that. And I suppose I would add on to that I think death is something that God decides when you die. So even if that person was the one who was driving, I think that's just an excuse. It was that person's time to move on their spiritual journey towards Allah. So there's no point blaming yourself, and maybe sort of reading about what happens after death. The eternal journey or the eternal path or something like that. Sheikh Bahmanpour has written a book on death and what happens, and I think knowing what happens with our loved ones after they've moved on from this world is really powerful, because a lot of the times we can't move on because we don't know what's happening. And then again, having that knowledge might help as well, and recognizing that it's not the end. It's just a movement on their journey. It's like they've gone to the next stage, and inshallah there'll come a time when we'll join them on that next stage. And at this moment, our duty is to do whatever we can to help them, because now they can no longer help themselves. So looking at ways in which we can make it easier for them on their journey in Barzakh, and how we can do things which will help us as well as help them, inshallah.
That's very inspiring. I want to write some of those points down, actually, because those are very inspiring. Thank you so much, Masuma. Oh, sorry, Masuma, I think you've muted yourself.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Sarah. It's been an amazing and inspirational talk. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the viewers have as well. And thank you for all of you listening. As always, the show wouldn't be anything without you guys there. So, and thank you for the comments and the questions that you put up there. And inshallah, join us next week. We have Madea Raza joining us next week, who will be talking about the humanitarian efforts that she's making. She is actually the lead in WF Aid. So it'd be interesting to see how she got there and what she's seen and what she's done. So please join us next week with Madea Raza, inshallah. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Finish with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.